Hello, hello, hello. How are folks doing today? Good to see you all here with me today. This is a late night live for me here in New York City in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It is about 10:25 in the evening. However, for some of you, this may be a moderate evening live. For some of you, this may be a late night live like it is for me. For others of you, this may be an early morning live. Um, we're all on different time zones. I know there's people from California who this is 7:25 in the evening, There's other folks from Australia. This is like morning time. There's folks in Europe. I don't even know what time it is over there. So we're all stuck at home, coronavirus. So I thought I would just kind of have a chat with folks. Got some things to talk about. I'm going to do a little bit of a news roundup. And after that, I actually thought I would do a segment. Called 10 Things You Don't Know About Caleb. 10 Things You Don't Know About Caleb. And I would tell you all 10 things that you don't know about me. Now, they're not deeply political things, obviously. But I thought that might just be entertaining. So before I get into anything, I want to get to what I think is probably the most important news item that I've seen. I just have to get right into it. I'm just going to get right down to it. Germany, and I know there are people watching from Germany. There has just been a huge crackdown against the Shia Muslim community in Germany. And that is deeply concerning to me. Right? The German government has announced that they are going after this Lebanese organization that they designate as terrorists, and they've gone after a number of mosques. They've raided some homes, from what I understand. It's all over the press, and it's just darn outrageous. It fills me with outrage that not only have they officially, put up this huge, condemnation and outlaw of an organization in Lebanon, but they're also going after Shia Muslims in Germany, because everyone knows that in Germany, the networks of forces that are violently trying to overthrow the Syrian government, that are tied with, Al Qaeda and ISIS, those folks operate very openly. And if you criticize them, they call you Islamophobic. But the forces that want to bring down the Syrian government, the forces from which ISIS and Al Qaeda emerged, those folks very openly operate, right? Those Sunni Wahhabi kind of forces, the forces that raise money for the Muslim Brotherhood, they operate very openly in Germany. But the Shia Muslims, the Shia Muslim community, is being targeted, and the allegation that's being leveled against the Shia Muslim community in Germany is that they're tied to this organization in Lebanon. Let's remember that this organization in Lebanon, Hezbollah, right? This organization in Lebanon that they're accused of having ties to, fought against ISIS on the battlefield. In fact, it was one of the primary organizations that fought on the battlefield against ISIS. So they're not having a crackdown on ISIS. They're not having a crackdown on Al Qaeda. They're not having a crackdown on the global network, working with the CIA, working with the Western capitalists to try and destabilize Syria and topple the Syrian government. Oh, no. No crackdown on them. But a huge crackdown on people in Germany who were practicing their Shia faith, alleging that they might be tied to an armed group that fights against Al Qaeda. Unbelievable. The German government is doing the wrong thing, in my opinion. That Shia Muslims have the absolute right to practice their faith, and that anti-terror organizations shouldn't be called terrorists. The U.S. government has the same designation, but if you look at the Middle East region, Iran, Iran's allies, they are not the source of terrorism and destabilization. They certainly are not. What are your thoughts on the idea of competition and of the working class as part of socialist construction? Very good question. All right, I will get to that. If you hit me with a super chat, I will give you an answer. Competition of the working class. But yes, I am just outraged about it, right? And, the Shia Muslim community is viciously harassed, just viciously harassed, even though, they are not the people who did 9/11. Those were Wahhabis tied to Saudi Arabia. They are not the people that ISIS emerged from. Those are Wahhabis tied to Saudi Arabia. I mean, all the acts of terrorism that we see are being conducted by Sunni Wahhabi extremists tied to the government of Saudi Arabia in most cases. But yet we continue to sell the Saudis weapons. We continue to enable Saudi Arabia to bomb Yemen and kill thousands of innocent civilians. We continue to allow, I mean, at this point, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from what I understand, not only are they bombing Yemen, but they are attempting to weaponize the coronavirus. They've bombed clinics. I mean, it's a war crime. I mean, the Saudi government that cuts people's heads off in public, that just allowed women to drive, is a huge violator of human rights. It's hugely tied in with terrorism, but no one says anything about it. But the forces that practice Shia Islam, that have respect for the Islamic Republic, get harassed, get demonized. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. And the German government is making a big mistake here. They shouldn't be doing this, right? This is a huge gift to Al Qaeda, right? This is a huge gift to the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a huge gift to all kinds of extremist groups. I mean, by going after Shia Muslims who want peace, Shia Muslims who are trying to bring Sunni and Shia together and are trying to create peace in the Muslim community. The German government is making a huge mistake, not only by this new ban, but also by raiding people's homes. I don't approve. Caleb does not approve. You can put that in your pipe and smoke it. Folks, when I was in Iran, they had very few English books, but they made a point of giving me a book, which is quite interesting. And I don't endorse this content. I'm not a Muslim by any means. But they gave me a copy of this book called Hussein, the Savior of Islam. And, this is a book. It's about Imam Hussein, who's an important figure in the Shia Muslim tradition. He's one of the 12 imams. Do you feel China imperialist in Africa? All right. Okay, written down. You will get an answer. But, I mean, I want to read you. This is how, this will be of interest to Marxists. This is how the foreword to this book, Hussein, the Savior of Islam, begins. Quote, "The history of mankind is a chain of successful and failing revolutions, one replacing another, only to be replaced by yet another. Revolutions have always been a tool of evolution, a sure sign that change must occur. The message of Muhammad was, in the true sense of the word, a revolution. It gave mankind a new vision, a new sense of purpose. It was the message of peace and goodwill, of love and tolerance in a society where hatred, corruption, and lust for power ruled high. It was beyond social, cultural, and geographical barriers." If you read this, it's very clear that the Islamic Revolution of Iran, it had a what you might call an influence. It had a Marxist influence, right? I mean, the writings of Khomeini, where he condemns capitalism, the honor that they had the respect they had for Che Guevara, I mean, obviously the Islamic Revolution was not Marxist, but it had a Marxist influence, right? And it was, the slogans that Khomeini used. He said, "War of poverty against wealth, not capitalism, but Islam." So, in a lot of ways, I mean, the role that Iran is playing in the region, trying to help countries like Syria fight off the Western imperialists, trying to help the people of Bahrain fight for their national sovereignty. Okay. Great. Jimmy Dore, Anna Louise Strong. Okay. All right, I will address that. Thank you for the super chat. But yeah, there's a very clear anti-imperialist edge to the Iranian Revolution. This crackdown in Germany is deeply problematic in my view. That's all I can say. I mean, it's not good. And the Shia community has been subject to a lot of demonization and persecution. I mean, I went to a great event at Columbia University where the Shia Muslim community talked about how even other Muslims will discriminate against them, and that they're often banned from the prayer sites, on universities and such, and that that there is this effort by Saudi Arabia to demonize Shia Muslims, to make Shia Muslims, to call Shia Muslims apostates. Shia Muslims have been subject to such demonization, such sectarian hate, because Shia Islam is associated with Iran, because Shia Islam is associated falsely, right? The majority of the people in the army in Syria are Sunni. The new constitution of Syria actually recognizes the role of Sunni Islam in Syria and actually like gives it special attention. Regardless, the fact that Bashar Assad is an Alawite and Alawitism is considered to be a form of Shia Islam, I mean, it's just there's this huge sectarian campaign against Shia Muslims around the world. And it's done to further the strength of Israel, right? I mean, it's because Iran is seen as the main enemy of Israel, because Hezbollah is seen as a main opponent of Israel. Because of that, there's this global campaign against Shia Muslims, and it's deeply problematic. It's not good. And to see the German government jump on board with this, yeah, there you go. Someone's wishing me and my wife best wishes, and same right back at you, Yogi Fish. But yeah, I'm deeply disturbed to see that. I wasn't happy to see that crackdown. So that was the first thing I wanted to talk about in my little news roundup. Second thing, Tara Reid. Did people see about Tara Reid? Right? I mean, this woman has come forward with a credible claim of sexual assault against Joe Biden. Right? And we remember how there was this very strange, I mean, it could very well be true. We don't know. There was a claim of sexual assault against Brett Kavanaugh, the Republican, conservative Supreme Court justice. And the Democrats, they brought her to testify. It was a big thing. It got very ugly, in Congress, And now we see the Democrats basically trying to push this claim about Tara Reid under the bus. And we saw CNN take off of their page the phone call into Larry King from a relative, from Tara Reid's relative, from her mother, right? And I mean, we see this whole hypocrisy here, right? If accusers must be believed, if every allegation must be taken seriously, why did the Democratic Party definitely support the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh, while at the same time not look in? They're just ignoring these allegations about Tara Reid. Now, finally, we are hearing that they are, at this point, getting prepared to have Joe Biden address it on some degree. But cable news won't book Tara Reid, right? I mean, even though she's done interviews with The Hill, and Crystal Ball, she's done interviews elsewhere, but cable news is just kind of brushing it up. I mean, it's like they don't want this to be the reality. And folks, here's my other question. If Joe Biden ends up going down over the Tara Reid stuff, right? If he ends up having to resign as the presidential nominee with that or Alzheimer's, shouldn't Bernie by de facto be the winner, right? But that would depend on how many delegates he had at the convention and what has happened in New York City. New York State, they just canceled the primary, so Bernie won't get any delegates from New York. It's rigged. I mean, this is unbelievable. Will Joe Biden go down over this sexual assault stuff or over the fact that he probably has dementia or Alzheimer's? We don't know, but yeah, the Democratic Party, I mean, anyone who doesn't think the Democratic Party is rigged at this point, I mean, give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, the Democratic Party is such a bureaucratic machine. It serves its own ends. It doesn't serve the people. The Republican Party is ideologically demented and dedicated to free market extremism. But the Democratic Party is just a corrupt urban. It is an amalgamation of all the corrupt urban machines. The Daily Machine in Chicago, Tammany Hall in New York City, Rizzo Machine in Philadelphia. Right? I mean, it's the San Francisco, corrupt bureaucracy. It is a collection of corrupt political machines, all combined into one, and it's ruthless. The Democratic Party is ruthless. And if you look at this, it may be very possible that Joe Biden may have to drop out, and they'll find a way to still not nominate Bernie Sanders. This is unbelievable. It is unbelievable, folks. And the fact that they're ignoring Tara Reid, they're trying to downplay this. They can't downplay it. It's a credible claim. It's a credible claim, right? The story is starting to add up, right? You know, anyone who said anything questioning the woman who went after Brett Kavanaugh, the Democrats, how dare you, besmirch and accuse her? They wanted to hear, her, the accuser against Brett Kavanaugh. They don't want to hear Tara Reid. And Tara Reid's allegation is pretty believable if you look at all the tapes of Joe Biden acting like a creeper in front of cameras. We all know what Joe Biden does to women in front of cameras, sniffing them, touching them, making weird comments. Look at the videos of Joe Biden's behavior with little girls, with women on camera, right? This is what he does in public. This is what he does when cameras are rolling. So is the idea that he would take it much further when cameras are not rolling, someone who he was vulnerable, somebody who was like working for him? Is it not hard to is it hard to believe that Joe Biden might do something like this? And now her claim is adding up. We don't know. We don't know the whole story, right? We're looking for the facts here, but I'm sorry, folks. And the response of the Democratic Party is indefensible. There is no defense to this. There is no defense, even if this turns out to be completely false. Even if this turns out completely false. And thank you, David. We will talk about May Day. Absolutely, David. Absolutely. He says, Happy May Day to everyone in Bendigo, Australia. Workers of the world unite. And I will be talking about Michigan, but thanks for the super chat. I'm getting to that about the State House, so thank you for the super chat. But even if every claim from Ms. Tara Reid turns out to be false, the Democrats have still made fools out of themselves, right? Their response to this. Now, Michigan State Capitol. Now, did you see that picture, right, of these Liberate Michigan protesters walking into the state capitol with firearms, right? A crowd of them. They're like packed in there. Now, I have a feeling that crowd is a violation of public health regulations. When big crowds of people storm into the state capitol, I've got a feeling that's a public gathering, and it's a violation. It's a violation of the regulations. What the right wing is doing in Michigan is unacceptable, right? We can't have May Day rallies, every year, May 1st, there's big protests, people march in the streets. Well, we can't do that this year, right? Because we can't get permits, because it would be broken up by the police, because it's illegal, right? You can't have public gatherings unless you're a right-winger, right? There's supposed to be this big bias. Right-wingers are so persecuted. Liberal media is out to get them. Oh, my God. They're having rallies and carrying guns into state capitals. Yeah, well, that's what they want to do. Meanwhile, all the left, show me a left-wing demonstration, right? What those folks are doing is unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and it reveals a double standard. As long as you're fighting for the free market, which is what they're fighting for. Don't give me this, that they're, fighting for their country, or there's the deep state. Don't give me that. They're foot soldiers of free market capitalism. That's all they are. It's small business owners who are losing profit right now, and they have poured into the streets, and we're all suffering right now. We are all suffering right now. Don't get me wrong, right? I want this to be over. I want to liberate the country. I want to be back at work. I don't like this. I don't like sitting here. I love you all. I love talking to you all, of course, but I don't like being stuck in my house and Corona streaming all day. I would like to be doing my job like a normal person. I'd like to be having conferences to build the Center for Political Innovation. But we're all kind of stuck, and we're frozen, and we're frustrated about it. But these small business owners are seeing the fact that Amazon is eating them up. And so these foot soldiers of free market capitalism are going out and, I'm sorry. People always say leftists are disrespectful of the police, but look at what some of these right wingers are doing. Like, the police are standing there with their masks over their faces, and you got these rightists are just going up and breathing on them. Have you seen the footage? They're just like, breathing on them. And these rightists, they think it's fake. They think coronavirus is a big hoax. Most of them, a lot of them think coronavirus is all just a big hoax, all just made up. It's all just made up by the big Illuminati that's going to take away free market capitalism and make everyone a communist. These people are delusional and dangerous. I'm sorry. But now someone's asking me if I'm debating anyone soon. Well, debating isn't the right word. I do have a high-profile interview in the works, so fingers crossed on that. And I am planning to. I've been invited to go on a Discord. I'm going to be going on Saturday on this thing called Blue Discord, which is it's got 20,000 members. It's one of the biggest Discord servers, and they are going to have me on Blue Discord to do kind of a Q&A about politics and about one of my books. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm doing that. So, Blue Politics, it's called Blue Politics, and that's where I'll be. So I'm doing that, and then there's a high-profile interview in the works. I don't want to say the name, but you'll all see it, and you'll be very impressed and happy about it. A high-profile interview, and yeah, I mean, I'm open to debating people, right? I mean, there's different people that want to debate me. And I mean, I'll judge it on a case by case basis. If you've got a debate offer, that would be great. One of the super chats, I guess we'll just address this now, is that apparently there is some desire to have me on the Jimmy Dore show. Well, that's great. I'm getting people texting at me and giving me messages. Jimmy Dore wants to have you on. That's great. I'd love to go on with Jimmy Dore. I'm a fan of Jimmy Dore. Huge fan of Jimmy Dore. Love his content, love his content about Syria, love his content about Venezuela, love his foreign policy critiques, love his exposing of the democratic political machine. I'm a Jimmy Dore fan. So Jimmy Dore says the word, I'll go on his show. And if they want me on there, I guess the super chat was saying they want me to go on there to talk about Anna Louise Strong, which is interesting. Anna Louise Strong is one of probably my favorite writer. I mean, she's up there with William Z. Foster as far as I'm concerned, right? An amazing writer. I Change Worlds, the Stalin era. Just a great writer. If he wants to have me on to talk about Anna Louise Strong, I couldn't see anything wrong with that. I would talk about Anna Louise Strong. I mean, she's not exactly a current news story. I mean, she died quite a long time ago, but hey, I'm open to it. So, I mean, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. There you go. It was Steph that mentioned that. Someone is saying it was Jimmy Dore's partner, Steph. Well, great. Hey, I'm open to it. Jimmy Dore is great. I'm a fan of Jimmy Dore. There you go. So I answered that, and I answered the Michigan thing. I will say, before we finish our news roundup, right? And if people have more super chats, I'll keep writing them down. I'll finish the news roundup, and then we'll get to the super chats. There was an armed attack on the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C. I don't know if people saw that. Some nut went to the Cuban embassy and started shooting. Did folks see that? Unbelievable. 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 Unacceptable. The Cuban government wants answers about what's going on. And I will add, go to the Grandma page, the English language newspaper of the Cuban government. There's some really revolutionary articles on there about Lenin and the legacy of Vladimir Lenin, about how only socialism will save humanity. The Grandma Cuban newspaper, sometimes you look at it, it's just normal kind of, news about Cuba, but they've got some really, in their English page, they've got some really revolutionary editorials, some great stuff. I would check it out. Yeah, so that's the news roundup. Any thoughts on non-Marxist Western philosophy? Okay. All right, writing it down. Non-Marxist Western philosophy. All righty. All righty, folks. So before I just start hammering out your super chats, why don't you actually start telling me your names and locations? I'll call you out as I see you. I know some of you in the chat. I see Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati is here. But yes, names and locations, I'll call you out as I see you. Tommy Farras in California. Glenn Stolberg in Pittsburgh. Adam Jensen from Germany. Hi from Mississippi, says JT24. California, baby, leftism today. Australia, Cincinnati. Ali Nakvi from Toronto. Los Angeles, says Sam. Hello, everyone from Corona, California. David from Italy. Cincinnati. Bauxite from the Philippines. Michael from Ithaca, New York. Dallas, Texas. California. London. Spencer Richards. Red Salute from Australia. Springfield, Missouri. Dust James in Massachusetts. Ontario. Calvin in Saskatchewan. Right? Hi from Maryland. Hello from Salem, Oregon. Ross in Baltimore. Lansing, Michigan. Iowa. Salinas, California. Ezra in Arizona today. Wollongong, Americans can't pronounce it, says Grant Jarvis. Levy from Belmont, Indiana. Georgia, USA. California, says Danny Bedford. Toronto. Alejandro from Colombia. Hafuzia says Detroit. Yes, very, very good. Memphis, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, USA. If I missed you, by the way, there was a couple that went by. Just repeat, I'll get to you. Rochester, New York, right? Solidarity from Northern Michigan, says A. Clark. Solidarity to you. Hello From Ohio, says Kevin Q. Greetings from Washington State, right? Happy May Day, and happy May Day to you, right? Bunker, Missouri, says Brandon Hoggard. Memphis, Corona, Maryland. Fairhope, Alabama. Connor from Indiana. Quite a crowd we've got here. Great, great, great folks. Great folks. And if I missed you, just repeat. I will call you out as I see you. Jay Stevanik from Ohio. Hafazia, the ignorance in socialism China was depressing. Dylan, San Diego. Jay Stevanik, Washington State, once again, says Brent McKinney. Right? Yeah. All right. There you go. There you go. So, folks, I guess I will start to address the super chats. Competition of the working class under socialism. Very interesting. That was a part of the Stalin political economic model, really existing socialism, was what they had Stakhanovism. Hussein, I have not heard of him. Talk of factions within the Chinese Communist Party. Oh, okay. I'll write that down. I haven't heard the name, the Arab communist leader you asked. I'll just answer that right now. I haven't heard of him. Factions in Chinese Communist Party. All right. Okay. But Stakhanovism was where, they would award the workers who produced the most, who worked the hardest, right? The steel workers who produced the most steel would be rewarded. Textile workers who produced the most textile would be rewarded. In Cuba, they call it emulation, I believe is what they refer to it as. But it's the same kind of process. They give like a cash bonus to those who work the hardest, and they honor them. It's like they're heroes because they're producing the most for the nation. And that's a big part of really existing socialism. And it is competitive, right? Everyone wants to be the one to produce the most. It happens. It's not the same as capitalist competition because they're producing for the surplus that goes to all, but they're getting rewarded for putting in the biggest effort, right? I think that's the difference. But yes, there is workers' competition. And, I know socialist groups sometimes have competitions. Who can sell the most newspapers, right? Who can, who has the best newspaper sales? Who does, it's like that's part of encouraging people to work hard. There was an old communist woman that I knew, and she had a bust of Lenin in her apartment. And the reason she had it was because her deceased husband had been one of the top sellers of a communist newspaper during the 1940s, and he'd been awarded this bust, in the communist group he was in for this, this great honor of doing that, right? Now, obviously, selling those newspapers, the proceeds went to the party and building the party, but he was honored for his effort that he put into it. I'm not opposed to that, right? Competition within within a socialist society. Sometimes you need more competition. Competition itself is not problematic. What's problematic is the rule of profits and the anarchy of production. But in a socialist society, for example, there'll be competition, for university admissions, for one thing, right? If there's a limit, right? Some of maybe your best university programs, you might have students competing to get the highest test scores to get into it, right? These things happen. Competition is part of society, especially when there's a scarcity of resources. Now, communism, the ultimate goal, the stateless, classless world, there would be so much, there wouldn't be anything to compete over, right? Communism is this world of vast abundance that we can't even really understand. But within a socialist society, yes, there's going to be competition to some degree or other. It's, so I hope that answers that question. All right. I was asked about China, imperialist in Africa, and Vietnam. Well, what is imperialism? Okay, so imperialism is an economic system, right? Imperialism is not a synonym for one country taking over another country, one country influencing another country. If that were the case, every country would be imperialist to some degree or other because every country influences another country. Imperialism is a system. It's a system where a small group of bankers based in Western countries rule the world and keep the world poor so that they can stay rich, right? That's what imperialism is. It's about halting economic development in impoverished countries, and using them as spheres of influence to dump your excess commodities onto. Lenin wrote a whole book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, explaining the economics of imperialism. Imperialism is a system, right? It is a system. It is the rule of the world. It's the rule of the world by Western capitalist corporations, and it's about keeping countries poor. China in Africa is doing the exact opposite of that. It's building up impoverished countries. It's building infrastructure, power plants, hospitals, airports, railway systems, right? And those things, they don't suppress the domestic economy, they stimulate the domestic economy, right? China tends to build up the economy of the countries it trades with. It doesn't demolish it, right? If you look at the IMF, the World Bank, the way they operate, they go into a country and they put all the domestic companies out of business. That's imperialism, right? China goes in and builds all kinds of infrastructure to help domestic businesses. That's not imperialism, right? Imperialism is about keeping countries poor, keeping them as captive markets, spheres of influence. China's role, its economic relationship with developing countries, is not imperialist, right? Now, the question also asked about the relationship with Vietnam. No, China and Vietnam have had a lot of difficulty, right? I see someone's in the chat asking about, Pol Pot and all of that. Yeah, the Kampuchea War was horrendous. China had pro U.S. foreign policy. I mean, it started with the Gang of Four, but it continued under Deng Xiaoping, and they were basically aligned with the United States in international affairs, and it was problematic. And part of that was supporting the crazy ultra-leftist, thoughts on Governor Hogan and his lady here in Maryland getting 50,000 max from South Korea. Oh, I haven't heard about that story. I haven't heard about it. So, I mean, I haven't heard about it. So if I knew something about it, I could give you a comment on it, but I don't know the story, so haven't been following it. But Vietnam, right? Vietnam and China, there's some disputed islands that they don't agree about. Vietnam says it's their islands. China says it's their island. And there's tension there, right? Watch my interview I did with Luna Oi, right? Great Vietnamese communist, but when I pressed her on China, she had some pretty negative things to say about China, right? It's unfortunate, and there's differences in Vietnam about that, right? There was talk of at one point there was talk that China. That the United States might be like having battleships in Vietnam. There might even be U.S. military bases in Vietnam. Now, the military base thing, that didn't happen. But Vietnam and China don't get along too well. And we know that Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger worked very, very hard to foment that disagreement. And the Kampuchea War, the aftermath of the Vietnam War after the USA pulled out, and Pol Pot and all of that. Pol Pot was getting supported by the United States as well, right? Not just China. And that Pol Pot was a crazy ultra-left extremist who was basically being used against the government of Vietnam. And China had this bad foreign policy line of Soviet social imperialism, where they said the Soviet Union was the main danger to the people of the world. And so on that basis, the USA and China were the only countries that supported Pol Pot, and that's not good, and it's unacceptable, and I don't agree with that. That's all there is to say about it. That doesn't make China imperialist. Now, someone asked about factions in the Chinese Communist Party. Well, officially there aren't any factions. Like, there's not any official factions that they this is the faction. There's none of that. But there are probably, when you have an organization of 90 million people, the idea that they're going to agree about everything is pretty ridiculous. A Marxist-Leninist party will try to have ironclad unity, try to give a united face to the masses, but there's going to be different approaches within the party. And that there were big struggles. If you look at, the 100 Flowers campaign, which was, in the 50s, the de-Stalinization campaign. You look at the anti-rightist campaigns. You look at the rectification movement. You look at the Cultural Revolution. You look at, the reform and opening up. And you look at, and even more recently, right, there was this very corrupt local official who was kind of presenting himself like he was a neo-Maoist, a guy named Bo Lai, who was, he was like he was ultra-left, and he was presenting himself as kind of a neo-Maoist. And there's going to be disagreements. There's going to be people who kind of function together and see things their way or other ways. I'm not in the Chinese Communist Party. I will say that the USA really would like to foment disagreement. And the fact that there was this anonymous letter that was being circulated by U.S. media. It was supposedly a letter written by members of the Chinese Communist Party who didn't like Xi Jinping. That was in about 2015. And the U.S. media just went crazy circulating it around, but who knows if it even represented anybody? Who knows if it even represented anybody? It could have been written by CIA people, right? We don't even know. But I speculated at the time that letter may indicate that there were people within the Chinese Communist Party who were being approached by the United States in the hopes of like a military coup to topple Xi, and that they don't like Xi's. Xi is a nationalist. I mean, he's reviving. He's fighting for China, right? He is very strongly fighting for China. He's also reviving the socialist culture, reviving Mao. Do you view technical and engineering skills as important? I'm sorry, repeat that. That's a strange question, but repeat it. Technical engineering skills is important in the primitive accumulation of socialism. I think that's what the question is. Well, okay, so first of all, primitive accumulation refers to the way in which capitalism emerged out of feudalism, right? So that's the primitive accumulation of socialism. That's not a correct thing. There is a slur by anti-communist ultra-leftists will try and say, well, it wasn't really, the socialist countries, it was primitive accumulation or something, and that's just a weird thing. But the primitive accumulation of socialism, even that term itself is not correct, because primitive accumulation refers to the way the feudal commons were broken up and the way the capitalists acquired property when seizing power from the feudal nobility. So even that is a little bit off. But then, do socialist countries use engineering skills? Yes, of course. They promote science and architecture. I mean, they have to train their people. Scientists and engineers are very essential in the construction of socialism, and every socialist country has worked very hard to develop those people. And what you can call brain drain. There's a huge effort by the Western capitalist countries to try and, push those people to pull those people, rather, out of socialist countries. Huge effort by the Western capitalist powers to try and strip socialist countries of their skilled, their doctors. There's a lot of Cuban doctors, right? They get that free education from Cuba, they get their medical degree, and then they get on a boat to Miami, and with that free education, right, that they got, that free medical school, if they went to medical school in the United States, they'd be in debt. They get to Miami, they start practicing medicine, and they talk shit about Cuba. I was so oppressed. Oh, it was so awful. And they get automatic citizenship from the U.S. government. Unbelievable, right? But that's called brain drain, right? The reason the Berlin Wall was built, most people in East Germany did not want to leave. Most people, ILW Local 13 in the House. ILWU is a very revolutionary union, very revolutionary history, back to the 1934 strike. Very, very revolutionary, right? You read about the dock workers' strike of 1934, where the Communist Party, Sam Darcy and Harry Bridges, they shut down the docks of San Francisco. Very radical, right? The way the dock workers, the longshoremen, the way they were treated in San Francisco was just horrendous, right? There was they called it the straw boss system, where it was very humiliating and degrading. You had to kiss ass in order to work. Just to work, you had to go and beg for work every day. They were treated so badly. And then, the communists, they went in there and they organized the International Longshore Warehouse Union. They shut down the docks. There was a strike, and around the city, other workplaces struck in solidarity, the Teamsters and others, and the National Guard went in there. People were killed. It was a huge incident. And, San Francisco had a general strike. And it was the communists led it. And, Francis Perkins, the Secretary of Labor, and Roosevelt had to get on the phone with communist leaders and negotiate for the docks of San Francisco to open back up. And the ILWU is a very radical union, right? They had one-day strikes on May 1st in the past to protest the war in Iraq. They shut down the docks in protest of the execution of the Rosenbergs. They shut down the docks. They refused to unload ships from apartheid in South Africa. Very revolutionary union. Very, very revolutionary union, ILWU. So I'm glad there's somebody from the ILWU watching, right? That's up there. Another union that's kind of like that, that's got a more radical history, is the UE, the United Electrical Workers. They're very similar. So yeah, shout out to you. Now, David, he talked about how it's already May 1st, and it's going to be May 1st in, like an hour in New York City. But May 1st is International Workers' Day, right? I think it was a communist song. May Day is the Workers' Day. May Day. May Day is the Workers' Day. May Day. May Day is the Workers' Day. Communist holiday. May Day is the Workers' Day. May Day. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's May 1st. May 1st is the day associated with revolutionary. Yeah, it's the day associated with. Actually started here in New York City with the Chicago strike, the protests for the 8-hour workday in Chicago. The Haymarket incident where there was bombs thrown at police, and they ended up executing a number of socialist and anarchist leaders for their allegedly killing this police officer, which they didn't do. And the Haymarket incident, that's how they created International Workers' Day. And it was the struggle for the 8-hour workday, which we didn't get the 8-hour workday until like the 1930s in the United States. They didn't declare it at a federal level. People have died for the 8-hour workday. People forget how much fighting has gone on, to get us our basic rights. And we should remember that now as they're trying to roll them all back. They're trying to use this pandemic as disaster capitalism to just come in and just strip away everything. People, where's the stimulus check? People haven't gotten their stimulus checks. I mean, people aren't getting their unemployment benefits, right? It's been delayed. People aren't getting their unemployment paid out. The capitalists are trying to see what they can get away with right now. They're letting their right-wing Michigan people storm into the Capitol with guns. They're not allowing leftist, May 1st demonstrations, right? Coming out of this pandemic, there's going to be class struggle in this country like you've never seen. There's going to be unemployment councils. There's going to be labor struggles. There's already labor struggles going on at Amazon, right? There are going to be some big shakeups in this country coming up, right? There's talk about Corona strike, rent strikes. We ain't seen nothing yet, right? You think the Bernie movement was big? You think Occupy Wall Street was big? I mean, this is going to be big, right? This is going to be big. But ideologically, the only way things can get better is with socialism. I mean, we're going to need to ideologically have an influence over this struggle. A lot of people are going to get interested in socialism, and they're going to be, spoon-fed a bunch of synthetic left crap from Adorno and, the Frankfurt School and all of that. And so we're going to have to build the Center for Political Innovation to push, to influence this mass uprising that's happening. The mass uprising is going to happen, folks. But if it's not guided ideologically, if it's a synthetic left uprising, right? If it's led by the forces that believe in Malthusianism and overpopulation, that hate existing socialism, it's not going to be good, right? It's not going to be good. If it's led by forces who think that people should be, poorer because that's better for the environment, it's not going to be good. We're going to need to build an entity, the Center for Political Innovation, that can point this uprising that's coming and will last years. I mean, it's going to be years of struggle. We need to point it in a good direction. Now, Boxspite is pointing towards this Discord that's been set up, and it's great. People here created a Discord to support my efforts to build the Center for Political Innovation. Great. That's great. I've been on there. It's fascinating to talk to the people on there. So I'm really glad they set up this Discord server. It's going to be great. I've been on there. I've seen what some of the people on there have said. Great stuff. I'm really glad they did it. So check it out if you haven't seen it already. Now, I was asked about non-Marxist Western philosophy. I'm not sure, are you talking about Immanuel Kant? Are you talking about Descartes? Shout out to Joe the Red. I see he's with us. Hey, Caleb. Well, hey, back to you. What are you asking about, right? I mean, there's existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre. Are you familiar with Du Boisian Marxist-Leninist scholar Tony Montero? Of course I'm familiar with Tony Montero. I know him very, very, very well, right? I mean, he's very well known in Philadelphia. A brilliant guy, and he's spoken up about Trump. He's strayed from the left-wing narrative about Trump. He's a brilliant guy. I would love to interview him sometime, right? I know Don DeBar, the political analyst often will do interviews with him. But yes, Dr. Tony Montero, I am familiar with his work. Brilliant man, brilliant man. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely familiar with his work. And he's great, and he has a big following. There's a lot of people in Philadelphia who really look up to him and listen to his lectures. He's a great guy. Tony Montero, Anthony Montero, respect. I totally respect him. And from what I understand, he has a long history in the revolutionary movement. I believe at one point he was put on trial and acquitted, when he was young, I believe. He was charged with some kind of, there was some kind of frame up against him politically. And he has a long history of activism and such. He's a professor, an academic, brilliant, brilliant fellow. So yes, I'm familiar with him. And I'm a fan. I'm definitely a fan of Tony Montero. Glad you asked. But what else is on people's minds? I guess there was the non-Marxist philosophy. You're asking about Sartre. You're asking about, existentialism. I took philosophy classes in college. They were interesting. And I had a roommate who really got into philosophy. And I know Marxist philosophy pretty well. And I've studied Plato more recently. In college, we would read Plato's Republic. And I got so sick of reading Plato's Republic. I took political science. It seemed like every class we had to read Plato's Republic, and I got really tired of the parable of the cave and all that stuff. But, the Phaedo, right? Plato's Phaedo, account of the death of Socrates, is deeply, deeply moving. If you want to read some really powerful philosophical writing, read the death of Socrates, the Phaedo, where Socrates is telling as he's dying, for goodness sakes, the man has drunk the hemlock, he's dying, and as he's dying, he's lecturing his followers about how the soul can be separate from the body, and how you need to have mind over body, and how you have to fight to not be controlled by your body, and how it's amazing stuff, right? It's just, Socrates, I believe Socrates was a great influence. He was a great progressive. He was very early on, and he ended up being executed because he was corrupting the youth of Athens. But the Academy of Athens, that conspiracy that he built with all these people, he was getting them to think critically about philosophy. I think Socrates was a great revolutionary of the classical era. Western philosophy is worth looking into. So is Eastern philosophy. I think Eastern philosophy is interesting as well. And there's no reason we should only study Western philosophy. But rediscovering Plato's writings and his account, the Socratic dialogues, has been very meaningful. I know that neoconservatism in the United States is based on a distortion of Plato. And I bet you didn't know that, of Plato and Socrates. Bet you didn't know that. But the neoconservative thinkers, right? They were all kind of grouped around a professor named Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss was in Germany. He was Jewish, so he fled when Nazi Germany came into power. He was at the New School. He was at the University of Chicago, and he was this philosophical professor who did a whole reinterpretation of Socrates and Plato to be ultra elitist. And if you look at a lot of the neocons, right, the neocon thinkers were studying, and they were students. It was kind of like that in Harry Potter. There's that professor, the Slughorn, who has this little club of students he thinks will be high achieving. Well, a lot of the neocon ideologues were in the little club of Leo Strauss. And Leo Strauss was a total elitist. He believed in philosopher kings, people ruling over other people. This idea that the average people are stupid and we need to manipulate them. And the neocon school of thought is largely rooted in a distortion of Plato's philosophy to be reinterpreted in this very, very elitist way, which people don't know about. So there you go. I hope that answers your question about Western philosophy. Yeah. So what else is on people's minds? Any other super chats you want me to get to before I start reading you the list of 10 things that you don't know about Caleb Maupin? I'm going to tell you 10 things about myself that you did not know, right? Perhaps that's a very egotistical thing to do, but if you don't want to listen, you don't have to listen. You're not required to. But I have a list of 10 things you didn't know about me, which I'd be happy to tell you as I'm sitting here Corona streaming. So, any other super chats? Any other political things you want me to answer about? Any others? I am all ears. I am ready to answer them. If not, we'll jump right in to the 10 things that you did not know about me. Now, someone's saying you're not a natural redhead. Part of me wishes that was the case, but I'm definitely a natural redhead. So there you go. All right. 10 things you did not know about Caleb Maupin. Number 1, I once won $100 for impersonating Elvis Presley. That's right. When I was a student, I won $100 for my Elvis impersonation. I dressed in the costume, I got a wig, and I impersonated Elvis, and I won. I won the school talent show, and it was a hit. It was on local access television, that was 8th grade, and I brought the house down. Audience participation. I did Elvis, and I won $100, and that was a big deal. People talked to me about it around town for the next 5 years of my life. I would go everywhere. You're that Elvis guy? You won the contest dressing as Elvis? I'd be like, yes, I was the Elvis guy. I was the Elvis guy. I won $100, and it was interesting because my grandmother, her minister at her church, she was a Lutheran. Her minister was also an Elvis impersonator. So he actually trained me to be an Elvis impersonator. So I remember I went and sat down with the minister and my grandmother's minister, and he showed me little moves to make and how to shake my knees and the kind of things to do with my voice and the lip. And I learned to be an Elvis impersonator from my grandmother's minister, and that's how I ended up winning $100 as an Elvis impersonator. So there you go. I bet you never guessed that I won $100 for my Elvis impersonation. But that's why I promised you that this is a live about things you did not know about me, and you didn't know that. Next one. I spent 2 weeks at Eagle Butte Reservation in North Carolina, or North Dakota, I'm sorry. Right? I bet you didn't know that, right? But yes, when I was a high school student, I went and volunteered at Eagle Butte Reservation in North Dakota. That is a Native American reservation. And I stayed there for 2 weeks. I helped clean out a graveyard. I worked in the community center. It was quite an experience for me to go all the way to North Dakota and to spend a lot of time on this reservation. It was quite an experience. Someone's asking me to speak on Nick Fuentes. Okay. All right. It was quite an experience. I had never done that before. And it was educational for me. And I would see the AIM newspaper for the American Indian Movement, like in gas stations. And there was kind of a pride in the indigenous heritage. The reservations were very divided. You had Native Americans who'd converted to Christianity and Native Americans who practiced indigenous religions. There was a big divide. A lot of Native Americans are in the U.S. military. I didn't know that. But yeah, that was an experience for me, and I'm really glad I had that experience. So that was number 2. Number 3, I had an uncle who was in Hollywood movies. Bet you didn't know that, but yes. My Uncle James, my mother's brother, he was a theater professor in Chicago, and he had been in a number of movies. He was in the movie A Bridge Too Far as an extra, and he was in a number of Hollywood movies. He was in an episode of Chicago Story, which was like a police show, and he had a lot of acting gigs in TV and movies, and he was kind of my hero when I was a kid. Right? Because I lived in a very, very small rural area, but he lived in Chicago, which was this big city. And I would go to his apartment with him and my aunt, and, I would see they were in theater, they were in movies, and they were living in Evanston, which was in Chicago. And wow, I was just in awe of my uncle. And he was in movies, and he taught acting classes. He was an acting professor. And he actually died when I was 11 years old. He had a heart condition called Marfan's syndrome, and he died. And his memorial was very widely attended, and he was a bagpiper. He played the bagpipes And because of his heart condition, he couldn't ride a normal bicycle. So he rode a recumbent bicycle. And he actually biked around the world in his recumbent bicycle. So he was like well known as this promoter of recumbent bicycles. Those are bicycles where instead of having the bars in front of you, you have the bars behind you. So he was really a go-getter. He was somebody who did a lot of things. And he eventually, he died at the age of 45 from his heart condition. But he was kind of my hero when I was a kid. And he was in movies, and he was a professor. And yeah, that was my uncle. I really looked up to my uncle. He wore a leather jacket all the time. He thought that was very cool. He wore a leather jacket, but he didn't want people to think he was a racist, because apparently a lot of biker guys are. So he wore a leather jacket, and he had this button with racism crossed out on his leather jacket, so no one would think he was a racist. So he wore a leather jacket with this, no racism button on it. That was my uncle, my Uncle James, who died when I was 11, and he was kind of my hero. So there you go. All right. Another thing I bet you didn't know about Caleb. Which one do I want to do next? I'm not doing these in any particular order. Well, I was given a shotgun when I turned 18. My grandfather loved shotguns. And when we would go visit my grandfather in Missouri, we would go shoot clay pigeons, right? They had this machine, these discs, ceramic discs, and you would take the shotgun and you would shoot the shotgun. And it was a tradition in my father's family that any time that that a young man turned 18, my grandfather would give them a shotgun. And so I remember I was 18 and my grandfather gave me a shotgun. And I had no desire to own a shotgun. So as soon as we were gone, I said to my dad turned to me, he said, "Do you want the shotgun?" I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, I'll get rid of it." And I never actually owned it. Like I guess, it was given to me and then my dad got rid of it. But I had no desire to own a shotgun. But yes, when I was 18, my grandfather made a big deal of giving me a shotgun, as he gave to every young man. So there you go. What do you think of Benjamin Teitelbaum's new book, War for Eternity, The Rise of the Far Right? Well, it's a new book, and I've never read it, and I don't know why you're asking me about it. I'm sorry, but I have not read that, so I don't know about it. All right. I'll cross these out as we do them. Right? Okay. Here's one thing I bet you didn't know about me. I have a theory about the Washington Monument. I have a theory about the Washington Monument. Right? Now, we all know it's cliche. What does the Washington Monument look like? Right? We all know what it looks like. But there's more to that story. Folks who look into the life of George Washington, the father of our country, will know that George Washington's children were all adopted. Why? Because when George Washington was a child, he had the measles. And it left him sterile. And George Washington was unable to have an erection. Right? George Washington was unable to have an erection. So the statue, the Washington Monument, looks a lot like something that George Washington could not do. My theory has always been that George Washington was old, and he was sitting around in the bar with his friends, and they said, "George, you have it all. You're the richest man in the 13 colonies. You're the richest, you're the first president of the United States. You're this very prominent military leader. But there's one thing that all of us can do that you cannot do. And so when you die, as a joke, we are going to make a statue of the one thing that you cannot do." That's why the Washington Monument was built. Now, I have no evidence of this, but I find it to be an odd coincidence that George Washington, who could not have an erection, his monument looks like a giant erection. It's odd. Things like that just don't happen. right? And no one ever talks about the fact that he was sterile, that he had measles as a child and could not have an erection. So I think, it's supposed to be an Egyptian obelisk, but I have a feeling that it's an inside joke. That's my theory, right? Put that in your pipe and smoke it. I could be completely wrong. Definitely not a historian, but I have a feeling that that's what was going on there. Alrighty, what other things do you not know about Caleb? Oh, here's one. I taught a class of white kids, all white kids, about Kwanzaa. When I was a senior in high school, I was a student teacher. I was part of this program they had at my high school called Career Pathways to the Teaching Profession, where you got college credit for taking a class on education, and then you were a student teacher. You would assist teachers. And so I was part of that program, and I taught fourth grade. I taught in a first grade class, then I taught in a fourth grade class. And in the fourth grade class, I was with them, and there were 3 days before the holiday, and the teacher had me come up with a lesson plan. And I said, well, why don't I do a lesson on holidays other than Christmas, other than the Christian holiday of Christmas? And she said, that's a great idea. And so I taught them about Hanukkah, and then I taught them about Kwanzaa. And I'll tell you, this class full of all white kids, every kid in that class was white. They thought Kwanzaa was the coolest thing they had ever heard of. I showed them videos about Kwanzaa. We talked about it. I went over, there's like 14 principles of Kwanzaa, and they thought Kwanzaa was really, really cool. They wanted to have a Kwanzaa party. The teacher said, no, let's not get out of control. But I remember I had a great time teaching a class of fourth graders who were all white about Kwanzaa. That was cool. That was one of my coolest experiences. And in a way, I feel like it was a little bit of activism because, that was the year I graduated from high school. It was 2005, 2006, right? That school year. And that was the time when Bill O'Reilly was having this War on Christmas campaign. And if you said Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, that was like this big crime. So to teach these kids about, these kids were all white and they were all Christian, but to let them know that there are other holidays out there. And that, in a way, it was kind of an activist-y thing to do. And it was kind of fun, too. The kids thought Kwanzaa was very, very, very cool. So there you go. And, you can look into the history, right? Kwanzaa was started by Dr. Ron Karenga, who was a black nationalist who was aligned with, who was it? Was aligned with, he was against the Black Panthers, right? And the FBI kind of used him to attack some Black Panthers. So Kwanzaa itself has a shady past, but a lot of, revolutionaries who admire Black nationalism don't admire Kwanzaa because it's associated with this guy who killed Black Panthers. I think Ann Coulter wrote an article called Kwanzaa, the Holiday Brought to You by the FBI. There's a whole shady history there. But regardless, teaching a class full of fourth graders in my little tiny town about Kwanzaa was a great experience, and I'm really glad that I did it. So there you go. I taught a class of kids who were all white about Kwanzaa. All right. How about this one? I don't hold pens correctly. Folks, I don't hold pens correctly. Anyone who's met me in real life, people always notice it. They say, why don't you hold your pen correctly? I have long, bony fingers, and I just... you're supposed to hold it like this, but I just don't do it. I hold my pens like this. I write like this. I always have. And people notice it, and they just are perplexed. And when I was in school, they tried so hard to make me write normally with a pen. They were so determined to make me write normally with a pen. I had teacher would always she would see me and she would force my hand into the right position 2-3 times a day. Hold your pencil right. First grade, second grade, third grade, fifth grade, they just kind of gave up on me, right? I hold my pens like this. I don't hold them like you're supposed to like this. This position doesn't fit with my fingers, right? I hold my pens like this. I always have. I write strangely, right? So there you go. So I don't hold my pens correctly, and great attempts were made throughout my educational experience to force me to hold my pen correctly. I just am not capable of doing it with my long, bony fingers. So there you go. Alrighty. I don't hold pens correctly. What else? Oh, I aspired to be a screenwriter and playwriter. That's what I wanted to do. When I was a kid, I had it in my head that I was going to be a screenwriter. I was going to make movies. I bought books. My parents, even for my birthday, would give me books on how to be a screenwriter, the principles of style. I learned how to write a screenplay, that the special format where like the person who says the line, their name is like center, right? And then you have the text in the middle. And you have, very, very intense, complicated, like scene descriptions. And it's, I wanted to be a screenwriter. And, I really loved Ian Fleming. I read all the James Bond books, and I thought Ian Fleming had this really, really, romantic lifestyle. He lived on like an island off the coast of Jamaica, and I don't know. I thought Ian Fleming was this amazing writer, and he was rich, and I liked Arthur Miller, and I read about Arthur Miller, and thought he had this amazing lifestyle, and I was going to be a screenwriter. That's what I was going to do, and I really liked horror movies. I really liked, the Hammer films, right? Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And I had it in my mind I was going to be a horror movie writer. I was going to write vampire movies. I was going to write action movies like Ian Fleming, and I was going to be this writer. And that's what I aspired to be. I aspired to be this screenwriter and playwriter. And I wrote a couple plays. I wrote in my church. I remember the minister gave a sermon about Ulrich Zwingli, who was a leader of the Reformation in Switzerland, who the church I grew up in, traced its heritage back to, Ulrich Zwingli and the Swiss Reform movement or whatever. So I remember I wrote this play, and it was performed by my church. And it was this whole thing. I wrote this whole play about the life of Ulrich Zwingli. I wanted to be a playwright. I wanted to be a screenwriter. And then I got political. All right, 9/11, I couldn't escape politics, got into politics, and at that point, I got political and, had no desire to be a screenwriter or a playwright. I wanted to be political. I wanted to, fight against U.S. imperialism. And yeah, when I got political, my desire to be a screenwriter faded away. But that was what I had set out to do when I was young. All right. Number 9. My grandmother was a feminist. Very interesting. So my grandmother, right, my mother's mother, was quite a woman. She was from Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. And her father had been a coal miner, and her mother, had been married to him, obviously. But then, she was like one of a number of children, I think 5 or 6, 7 or 8, 9 children. When the Great Depression hit, when everyone was desperate for food, they arranged for her to live with her aunt and uncle in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. So that's where she grew up. So she was raised actually by her aunt and uncle because of the Great Depression. And in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, she was the valedictorian of her class. And she graduated from high school in like the mid-1930s. And she was the valedictorian. And for a woman to be the valedictorian of their class in the 1930s was not very common. And she got a full ride, and she went to college at Otterbein University, I believe. Or I believe it was it Otterbein? Or I forget which college she went to. I don't think it was that. I think it was another one. But she got a full ride because she'd been the valedictorian of her high school. And she was a nurse. She was in the Army Corps of Nurses during the Second World War. And she treated people who'd been injured during D-Day. And she said that was quite an experience. When all those guys were storming the beaches and getting shot and whatever, and she was in London, they would fly him back to a hospital, and she took care of people who had their arms and legs blown off and stuff from Normandy, from the invasion of Normandy. But then the story that always stood out about her, that really made her a feminist, I guess, was that when my mother was in high school, they had a policy at the high school that my mother went to that if a girl was pregnant, she was expelled from school. right? And that was the way that they did things. That's the old style. Now they have, if they have like a special way, like they have tutors who go to their house, or if a teenage girl gets pregnant, she can still go to high school. But they had this policy, getting pregnant automatically expelled from school, right? So my grandmother heard about this policy, right, and was outraged about it. She said, that is not right. And she went to the school board and she got up and she gave this thunderous, angry speech to the school board, just yelled at them. How dare you? How dare you? We want the children in our community to have parents who are educated. How dare you kick teenage girls out of school? Deny them the ability to get a high school diploma for getting pregnant. How dare you? And she just screamed, like everyone was like, and this was like the early 1970s, right? In a small town, it was just not the kind of thing that you did, right? But my grandmother she couldn't stand it. And she had a reputation for this, and people would talk about it years later. They'd be like, my your grandmother, she's the one who went and screamed at the school board for so that was my grandmother. That was my grandmother, right? So there you go. My grandmother was a feminist. She definitely was a feminist. She died in, I think, 2012. She died, and I went to her memorial service. People told the stories about her. I was close to her in high school and all of that. I mean, I grew up around my grandmother, but I went back to Ohio for her memorial, and people remembered her as a feminist. She was definitely a feminist. She was a high-achieving woman. She died in her 90s. I think she was like 92 when she died, and a very high-achieving woman. She'd been through the Second World War, and yeah, my grandmother was definitely a feminist. Bet you didn't know that about me. All right, and the last of the 10 things you didn't know about Caleb was that at one point I was obsessed with the musical Hair. I don't know if people know about the musical Hair, but the musical Hair was the ultimate hippie musical, right? The Age of Aquarius, Let the Sun Shine In. I was obsessed with Hair at one point in my life. I had the CD of Hair. I had the original vinyl record album. I had the script of Hair. I knew about songs that had been originally cut from the show. I knew Hair like the back of my hand. It was weird. It's a Broadway musical from the 1970s, stupid counterculture, but it was, and when I was like a teenager, I thought the musical Hair was the coolest thing ever. And I don't know why. Definitely not my views now. Now I'm ranting against synthetic left and counterculture and all that. But I thought the musical Hair, the song "Walking in Space" about their LSD trip. What else? I mean, it's about a draftee. I mean, it's a musical. The main character is like going to be drafted into the U.S. military, and he doesn't want to go, and so he spends the musical kind of walking around and talking to different hippies about whether he should join the military and taking drugs and having sex, and it's rock and roll, and it was a big hit in the late 60s. It was on Broadway. It was a hit. It was just like a hit. And obviously that I wasn't, I liked theater. I had an uncle who was a theater professor and all that, but I hadn't ever heard of a play like that. So I got really into the musical Hair. And in fact, the musical Hair was very, very controversial, because when it was performed on Broadway, the climax of the first act of Hair, involved the cast walking onto the stage completely naked. Right? As the audience the character burns his draft card, and then the audience, or not the audience, but the chorus is singing the words "beads, flowers, freedom, happiness," and then the entire cast of the musical walks onto the stage naked, right? And that was, of course, very controversial, and having a public Broadway play. And then someone dressed as a police officer walks onto the stage and arrests the audience for 15 minutes to have the intermission. It was quite a Broadway play. It was like a hippie play. It was a counterculture play. And, I don't think much of it now, but at the time I thought it was the coolest thing ever. So there you go. You now know 10 things about Caleb that you did not know before. I guess they're kind of political in a way. They're kind of political, right? My grandma. You now know that I won $100 for impersonating Elvis, that I spent 2 weeks on Eagle Butte Reservation, that I had an uncle who was in Hollywood movies, that I aspired to be a screenwriter and playwright, that my grandfather gave me a shotgun, that I don't hold pens correctly, that I have a theory about the Washington Monument, that I taught a class of white kids about Kwanzaa, that my grandmother was a feminist, and that I was at one point obsessed with the musical Hair. Those are 10 things you did not know about me that you now know. So feel very, very lucky to know about those things. I'm just killing time here, Corona streaming. But people think it's better when I talk about things like this. When I tell little anecdotes and stories, it's better, right? So there you go. I'm telling you anecdotes and stories, trying to pass the time, trying to enjoy myself. But if there's anything else people want me to talk about, I'll happily talk about it. I have some books here I can talk to you about. I have some books here. JT24 says Caleb is very fascinating. Well, thank you, JT24. I think I'm fascinating as well. Don't we all think we're all fascinating? But seriously, I enjoy getting to know you all. I want to know you all. That's one of the best things about this Discord is I just wanted to know who the people were. I have no idea who you are. I have you call out your names and locations, but I have no idea who you are. But you all are with me. There's hundreds of you. There's thousands of people who watch these live. I mean, look at the unique view count and all of that. I mean, there's thousands of people that love to just listen to Caleb ramble about politics every week. I haven't had a diet beverage in over a month. Now, someone said if Ned Flanders was a socialist, it would be Caleb. Ouch. Do you really think I'm Ned Flanders? Really? Well, maybe I am Ned Flanders. Who knows? But I don't know. Whatever. But there you go. I appreciate that, Well, if no one else has any super chats or other things you want me to talk about, I mean, if you don't want to randomly ask me about books that just came out that are somehow related to far-right people that I know nothing about, go ahead. But yeah, I already showed you the book that I got in Iran, Hussein, the Savior of Islam, and how it has a very Marxist opening. So I already talked about that. So we can just put that one aside. This is a book that I actually enjoyed. It's by Simon Sebag Montefiore. It's called Young Stalin, and it's about Stalin before the Russian Revolution. And it's fascinating. You learn, there's a lot of history about the Bolshevik Party, about Lenin being in exile and writing, and Trotsky being in exile and writing. But Stalin, it comes across in this book as Stalin was the organizer. I mean, this is the guy who built the unions. This is the guy who edited the Pravda newspaper, the agitational newspaper. And this book, it's by Simon Sebag Montefiore. And Simon Sebag Montefiore, it's fascinating. He is such a conservative. Right, he's this stuffy British, intellectual, this very, and he gets away with saying things about Stalin that, it's like, you hear Stalin was worse than Hitler. That's the standard line that you hear, right? And he's not pro-Stalin, but he praises Stalin. He speaks of Stalin and kind of like, he compares Stalin to Napoleon. And he has kind of an admiration for Stalin, despite repeating some of the allegations against Stalin. But it comes across, if you read this book, Young Stalin, you get the portrait of a young revolutionary. You get the portrait of like an organizer, right? I mean, a young man who was kicked out of a priest seminary for being a radical and was just a rabble rouser and all of that. I haven't read Brzezinski's book, Strategic Vision. I do have Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, which I've been reading, which I find to be fascinating. Fascinatingly evil, but fascinating. But I haven't read Strategic Vision, but I should get my hands on that. Brzezinski is an individual I'm studying, and so I will check that out, Sammy, and thank you for that. Thank you very much for that super chat. But yeah, this book, Young Stalin, is very interesting. Also, now, I want to hold up this book. Now, this is an interesting one. Chairman Mao Talks to the People. Right? Now, this book, this is a compilation of Mao's interviews, Mao's speeches, but you won't find these in Mao's complete works. Like, these are things that were translated from Chinese newspaper articles, right? These are like transcripts of speeches. These are things that, they publish, they still publish. The Chinese government publishes the official, like, collected, selected works of Chairman Mao, right? And it's like there's so many volumes of it and all that. But this is different, right? Now, the editor, the guy who compiled it was named Stuart Schramm, and he was a China expert in the United Kingdom. Some people think he was a CIA kind of guy. But regardless, he compiles some very, very interesting. You get another side of Mao. You get Mao off script. You get Mao Zedong kind of making, random comments, and actually probably the best speech in this whole book is called Talk on the Question of Philosophy. And, you know, it's in here, and you would think when you hear talk on the question of philosophy, you think, oh, this is some boring lecture on dialectical materialism or existentialism. But it's Mao speaking to a group of university students, and it's on the internet. You can read Talk on the Question of Philosophy. And he tells stories, and he makes jokes, and he sings songs, and it is Mao off script. It's Mao unplugged. And he talks a lot about his own life, and he talks about Confucius, and he talks about the books he read, how he read the writings of Benjamin Franklin and Abraham Lincoln when he was growing up, and he talks. I mean, it's really something special. And he talks about trying to organize peasants and gambling with them, and losing money by playing dominoes with them. And he talks about Darwin's theory of evolution, and he talks about all kinds of stuff, and what he learned from being in the countryside. He writes here. This is Mao. He writes, when people die, there should be parties to celebrate the victory of dialectics, to celebrate the destruction of the old. Socialism too will be eliminated. It wouldn't do if it were not eliminated, for then there would be no communism. Communism will last for thousands of years. I don't believe there will be no qualitative changes under communism, that it will not be divided into qualitative changes. I don't believe it. Quantity changes into quality, and quality changes into quantity. I mean, this is great, brilliant stuff, right? He says, we say the end of mankind is something that will produce something even more advanced than mankind. Mankind itself is still in infancy, right? Freedom is the understanding of necessity and the transformation of necessity. One has work to do. When you discover a law, you must be able to apply it. You must create the world anew. You must break the ground and edify buildings. You must dig mines and industrialize. This is Mao off script, right? I mean, this is Mao talking to a group of university students, responding to their questions. Saying all kinds of things. It's really something special, right? Yeah, I mean, it's not the Mao that comes across in the selected works or the little red book. This is Mao off script, and it's fascinating. I would recommend, especially reading Talk on the Question of Philosophy, where he talks about losing money and gambling with peasants and singing songs and Confucius and Benjamin Franklin, and yeah, I recommend it. I really do recommend this text. It's translations of Mao, and it's not Mao that you will find, in the official documents, right? There's speeches in here, the 10 great relationships, and stuff like that. Someone's saying it's on audiobook. Is that true? That's great if it is. But yeah, I got a lot out of Mao, Chairman Mao Talks to the People, edited by Stuart Schramm. I really got a lot out of it. What else have I got here? This book is fascinating. Black Radical, The Education of an American Revolutionary. This is a very good book. It's by Nelson Peary. And Nelson Peary, he fought in the Second World War, and, he's from Minnesota. African-American man from Minnesota, fought in the Second World War and came back and joined the Communist Party USA. And he was in the Communist Party USA amid McCarthyism. And the book takes you from the end of the Second World War up until the 1960s, the Watts Rebellion. And this man, Nelson Peary, was a very, very dedicated communist organizer. And he talks about getting kicked out. He was kicked out of the Communist Party for refusing to abandon the Black Belt position. He was for independence for the Black Belt, and he was kind of a Maoist. And it's some fascinating history. And he talks about the economy of the country. And he talks, I mean, this is, wow, I was blown away. It's the memoir of a black communist organizer in the United States from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, up into like the late 60s. And it's fascinating, right? And he's just, you learn so much from Nelson Peary. And right, whether this rebellion in 1966, and what the role he played. He talks about the fight in the Communist Party in 1957 at their convention. They officially denounced black nationalism, and he was a supporter of black nationalism, so they kicked him out. Very fascinating. So I recommend that. What's your thoughts on YouTuber Vosh's content? I haven't watched him that much. One thing that I will say is he was on there telling people he was given that old argument. He was arguing that like, okay, Hitler took power, and this is the oldest argument in the book. What's sad? I mean, he's saying, okay, so Hitler took power because the German communists and social democrats couldn't unite. So that means you have to vote for Joe Biden because being too radical will lead. He's saying Trump is a white supremacist and a fascist. No, Trump is just an idiot. I shouldn't say that, but Trump is right wing. But if he was a fascist, he would have swung into action amid this coronavirus, and it's particularly weak. I mean, Vosh was on there basically urging people to vote for Joe Biden because Trump is so scary. And I was just like, give me a break. And that's like, again, that's like the oldest argument in the book, but it sounds, I could tell to his audience, it sounds like completely new. But I mean, I'm glad he's doing it. I respect anyone who gets on here and talks socialism on YouTube or on social media and just, comes on here and does their thing. I don't agree with him. And yeah, I mean, he doesn't support the socialist countries and all of that, but, I don't, whatever. I mean, he's doing his thing, and I don't agree with him about Biden. But yeah, I mean, whatever, there you go. But yeah, and he ought to have me on. I ought to debate him, right? I'd be willing to do it. I know a number of people have reached out to him and tried to set it up, and he's apparently afraid to engage with me. So I don't know what that's about, but whatever. Maybe he'll change his mind. Maybe he'll want to engage with me. I mean, I'm glad these people do their thing, right? I respect it. There you go. I know Luna, who I interviewed. I guess her boyfriend is this guy named American Johnson, who's on YouTube, and he's kind of an anarchist also. And there you go. Yeah, someone says we need to clip this little section and send it to Vosh. Well, hey, there you go. Rumble. It's like, oh, did you just hear what Caleb just said? He was talking smack about you, Vosh. Oh boy, are we in seventh grade? Are we in high school? I mean, whatever. I mean, I respect what he's doing. That's all there is to it. I haven't listened to a lot of his content. I turned him on one day when he was ranting about Biden. Maybe I should listen to more of what he has to say. At least he's criticizing capitalism, right? At least he's criticizing capitalism and he's doing his thing. Great. There's a lot of people doing this, and I challenge people. More people should do what I do, right? A lot of people want to criticize Jason Unruhe or criticize this person or that person. Do it yourself. Go do it yourself. That's what I think, right? It's the old stand-up comedian, right? When he's being heckled. He's up there. And then what is it with newlyweds? I mean, they're wed. Well, I don't get it. And someone's like, don't quit your J job, loser. You suck. And he's like, oh yeah, you think it's easy? You think it's easy up here being a stand-up comedian? Why don't you get up there? You think it's so, I mean, that's, but that's my response. My response to the Jerry Seinfeld heckler, which is do it yourself, do it yourself. I mean, if you don't like the way I talk about politics on here, you got to hang up, do it yourself, right? I mean, we need more ideas like this on social media. We need more people engaging. And a lot of us are stuck at home Corona streaming, so we don't have that much to talk about. There you go. So there you go. That's all we can do. Anything else people want me to talk about before I end this awkward, randomly decided to do Corona stream? Anything else on people's minds today? Anything else? Anything I can possibly make you happy by talking about, right? Because you speak now or forever hold your peace, or not forever, but, next few days, hold your peace, because I'm going to wrap this up. Be sure to check out Blue Politics when I talk about them. I would like at least one member of Majority Report to debate Caleb. Cool. Talk about anarchism. What is there to talk about? Will you stream Saturday? Probably. Yeah. Um, you know, time is of the essence, folks. Talk about another book you love reading. Lucky I have one right here. Towards Soviet America by William Z. Foster. Great book on the history of, I mean, it was the Communist Party's book that they published during the 1932 elections to kind of explain their viewpoint. Great, great stuff. Towards Soviet America. Great book. I learned so much. You learn how the Communist Party sees things. Very clear. In fact, the last chapter is called The United Soviet States of America, the USSA. Fascinating. But, chapter 1, the decline of capitalism. Chapter 2, the rise of socialism. Chapter 3, capitalist attempts to liquidate the crisis. Chapter 4, the revolutionary way out of the crisis. Chapter 5, the United Socialist States of America. Soviet States of America. Someone's asking me to do an Elvis impersonation. I no longer am qualified to do that. I was very good at it at one time, won $100 doing it, but I'm no longer qualified. I will say, when I was studying to do my Elvis impersonation, I read a book called Down at the End of Lonely Street, which is like a biography of Elvis. And I read a couple others. And I came to the conclusion that Elvis was a real asshole. The more you read about Elvis, the more you realize he was quite an asshole. Not a nice person. There's a lot of contempt for Elvis among African Americans because he stole their musical style. And he was white. That was why he became famous. He was a white guy who could sing black music. They weren't going to let black people, have that kind of fame, be on TV that way. So that, he did that. And he was just, in a lot of ways, he was not a nice person. You look about, the story about his wife, Priscilla Presley. That story is particularly, how old was she when he first got involved with her, and when did he marry her? And that's pretty gross. That's not a good story. He does not look very good there. Not a nice fellow. There's a lot of things about Elvis that are particularly disturbing when you look into the details. He was not a nice fellow, not a nice guy. Apparently he really didn't like the Beatles. He hated the Beatles because they kind of stole. That used to be the thing. People were obsessed with him. It was like, and then Beatlemania came along and he was left behind. He didn't. It was weird. Now he used drugs like crazy. He used uppers, downers, all kinds of drugs, but he didn't trip. He didn't, smoke marijuana. He didn't do hallucinogens. And he didn't, somehow in his mind, his drug use and their drug use, it was different. And Elvis is, he's just doesn't come across as a nice guy. I mean, the more you read about him, he just doesn't come across as a nice guy. He comes across as kind of a jerk. He was very poor, from a very poor working class background, and he got famous, and people make fun of Graceland, right? The Elvis Mansion, and that's the whole thing. In the UK, you don't have this as much in the United States, right? In the United States, we really believe in rags to riches, right? It's the idea anyone can be rich if they just try hard enough. There are like quote unquote hillbilly rich people, right? I mean, there are people in the United States who are quite wealthy, who are very, hillbilly-ish kind of, right? I mean, and they've had money in their family for generations, but they still kind of act in ways that we associate with like Southern stereotypes, Appalachian stereotypes. But, there's in Britain, they talk about when someone gets wealthy, that they don't spend their money the right way and all that. And in a lot of ways, Elvis was quite wealthy, but it was like he was never really respected by wealthy people. They always kind of saw him as white trash, and that even his very, very wealth, his mansion, kind of had a very, very working class vibe to it. Reading Lennon on imperialism, the USSR failed, the mode of production. Somebody repeat that, please. Repeat that, please. I didn't have time to read that. It went by way too fast. But I want to answer it because I answer all super chats. So someone please cut and paste that so I can see the rest of it. Was reading Lennon on imperialism again, looking into how the USSR failed because they consolidated production but didn't diversify like the model of petro-socialism. That's interesting. That's an interesting analogy to make. What's amusing is that in the final years, and I talk about this in my book, Oil and the Capitalist Crisis, in the final years, the USSR was trying to do petro-socialism. Right? They built this huge pipeline to West Germany. I forget what it was called, but they were in a position where they could start selling oil to Europe. And what had changed was in West Germany, you had a government in West Germany that was more open to that, right? There was space because of Reagan. There was distance between the United States and Europe politically. And in the 80s, you had in West Germany and France, you had, Graceland Tour was fascinating. Elvis's gospel album is one of the best of all times. I have heard that gospel album, and I enjoy it. Yeah, it's good stuff. And I mean, I used to watch the videos of him. I used to watch, the concert tours and all of that. I mean, the revival special I kind of enjoyed. But let me address this point. Finish this point about oil. Elvis. The final years of his life, or I'm sorry, oil, oil in the Soviet Union. In the 80s, you had in France and Germany, they were open to the idea of buying oil from the USSR. So the USSR spent millions of dollars to build this huge pipeline. And then the United States worked with Saudi Arabia to drop the oil price very significantly. And it bankrupted the Soviet Union. And actually, Michael Reagan, the son of Ronald Reagan, bragged about this and actually wrote a letter to Barack Obama that was published urging Barack Obama to do the same thing against Russia, to hurt Russia by dropping the oil prices. And now Russia is far more oil and gas centered than it was before. And still today, I mean, you should read. I mean, there's a lot written about how there's this huge effort to try and prevent Germany from buying oil and gas from Russia. Russia, look at a map. Russia and Germany, not that far apart. The United States and Germany, way far apart. Why in the world would Germans pay so much more money for their oil and for their natural gas to buy it from the United States? Why? That's a total ripoff. If I was a German, not a German communist, not a German socialist, just a typical German, I would be like, wait a second. We can buy gas from Russia, or we can buy gas from the USA. I mean, it costs so much more. It's just common sense. But the United States is trying to bully Germany into buying gas all the way, liquefied natural gas, all the way from the United States. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The Germans aren't going to stand for it. The Germans are not going to stand for it. And that's part of what's driving, unfortunately, the rise of the AfD in Germany, is that a lot of Germans, they're not left-wing, but they realize that NATO and the European Union isn't exactly doing them a favor, and so that kind of translates into some of these right-wing politics. I'm sure the German viewers can tell us more about it. They probably have a more in-depth. But, when I was in Russia, I met some Germans who were part of Die Linke, which is like the more socialist party, and they talked about how there's big divisions in Die Linke about NATO, because the main leadership of Die Linke are pro-NATO and all of that. But there are a lot of people in Die Linke, the left-wing party, that are anti-imperialists. So there's a big divide within the German left between the pro-NATO and the anti-NATO. And there's been a lot of attempts in Germany, just like over here, to isolate legit anti-imperialists. Now, someone's saying AfD is pro-NATO and pro-Israel, which doesn't surprise me. Again, it's like, there's quote-unquote nationalist sentiments growing in Germany, I guess you could say. But yeah, you're right. It's complicated. But yeah, AfD is pro-NATO and pro-Israel. I don't doubt that for a minute. And they probably say Muslims. They're probably wildly Islamophobic, and that's probably their main basis. And that's what the right wing has been reduced to. But I mean, that's what the right wing kind of always is. But, I mean, that they're not even true to their nationalist principles, right? They're just kind of, it's demagogy. Sarah Wagenknecht is based, someone's saying. And yeah, I mean, that's a political leader in Germany, a leftist in Die Linke, who is anti-NATO, who is anti-imperialist, and she's done some amazing stuff. And she's been attacked. And, I mean, she had a pie thrown in her face by some anarchists who were trying to claim she was anti-immigrant. And, she's been, the same forces that go after me, the same forces that go after Max Blumenthal, these, I don't know what you want to call them, these idiots who, get their politics from CNN and think they're socialists. They love to go after and target anyone who doesn't go along with State Department socialism. And Sarah Wagenknecht, they've gone after her. Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, folks. I think we're going to end it here. folks, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Camp, I saw your thing there, so I will address it before I go away. Stalin's on the national question and regarding Israel. It's interesting, though. There's a footnote in there condemning Zionism in that book. But yes, I mean, it's quite interesting, the definition of a nation. And there was, Stalin, you have to remember, did create the Jewish Autonomous Region in the Soviet Union. And I believe still to this day, the world's largest menorah is in the Jewish Autonomous Region of the former Soviet Union. So, I hope that gives you an answer. But yes, one can read it. But I believe there's a footnote in Marxism and the National Question that condemns Zionism, if I'm not mistaken. So, on that note, we will conclude once again. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. And on that note, folks, I'm out. I love you all. You are my good friends, my family. I appreciate being able to come on here and Corona stream. Go join the Discord and have fun. This was a little more lighthearted and random tonight, but we all had fun. We all talked politics. Best wishes, TTYL for now.